bespoke radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
I need your help to get to the year 1985.
You're listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
Good evening. Fade to Black. Bespoke radio for the masses. Yeah. How you doing? Today's Tuesday, January 21st, 2020. 21 days into the new year, only 345 days left. We are live from a bunker somewhere in the middle of beautiful downtown Burbank, California. And I would like to welcome everybody listening all around the world, all across the United States, hither and thither, to and fro, back and forth, up and down, east and west, north and south, far and near. This is Fade to Black for KJCR, the Game Changer Network, and KGRA, the Planet. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. What is cracking? How you doing? What's cracking, everybody? All right. Tonight, very special guest, Daniel P. Sheehan, is here. Oh, man. Oh, yeah. Tomorrow night, Kimberly Meredith joins the show. It's going to be a great show. We're going to have a brief conversation, and then we're going to open up the phone lines tomorrow night with all of you and Kimberly. So that's tomorrow night. Thursday night's another Fader night with open lines all night long. Follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. That's what you want to do. You can start right there at JChurchRadio. And the conversations exist in the sandbox. Hashtag F2B on Twitter. That's what you want to do. Get yourself TweetDeck. Make your life easy. Get TweetDeck. But anyway, hashtag F2B is the sandbox on Twitter. Hashtag F2BQ is Fade to Black questions for myself or tonight with Daniel Sheehan. You can post your stuff right there. We also have 2 chat rooms open, one over at Spreaker and one over at KGRA, the Planet. I'm reminded of... there was a moment, and I'm going to go back. This is probably Contact in the Desert, 2014, 2015. Daniel Sheehan is speaking. And one person after another came up to me and said, "Did you hear Daniel Sheehan? Were you there for that?" Right? And it was just the talk of the conference. It was the talk of the conference. And it's the reason why I go back to that, he connected. At that conference, you didn't have people coming up and asking about, "Hey, did you see so-and-so?" or "Did you see so-and-so?" Just it didn't happen. Happened with Daniel Sheehan. He has a way of speaking and connecting. And I remember it was probably a year later, maybe 2 years later or a year later, I had Danny on a panel. And by that point, we had him on Fade to Black maybe a couple of times and so forth. But when you get into, it's one thing to hear Danny speak, all right? And I get that. I understand it. I really do. when you get into his history and his biography and then realize the accomplishments and the things that he had done by such a young age and how focused he was. And I'm talking about for civil rights, legal issues, the presidency itself, all the way up through the Supreme Court and the White House, and his impact on this community and country, it cannot be measured. And that is Daniel P. Sheehan. We'll probably get some serious UFO talk in tonight, as we always do with Daniel. He is a graduate of Harvard Law School, a former director of the Christic Institute, and is a professor of world politics at the University of California. He is the general counsel and co-director for the Institute of Cooperation in Space. Mr. Sheehan has also had a long and distinguished history as a public interest counsel and was legal counsel in the Pentagon Papers case, the Iran-Contra scandal, 3 Mile Island, and Karen Silkwood, as well as many other high-profile cases. He's probably working on some right now. He shares the responsibility for formulation of a new world view integrating into all of the classical fields of human knowledge and is the now virtually universally accepted fact of the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence. I would like to welcome back to Fade to Black, Daniel P. Sheehan. Danny, good evening. How are you, young man?
Hey, Jimmy. It's good to be here. I'm way up in South Dakota on the Pine Ridge Sioux Reservation. Getting set to meet with the tribal council tomorrow morning on a big case. I'm glad to be in spirit down there in Los Angeles.
You're always stirring up trouble in the right way, and you've always managed to find it too as well. It's pretty incredible. We've gone over so much of that in the past, but I actually want to ask you a question that I've never asked you before, believe it or not, which is this. Mm-hmm. At what point did you, especially when you're dealing with law libraries, right? Witnesses, cases, evidence, everything that is in front of you. But at what point did you steer off of that and start to ponder us, right? How we got here. When did that start for you?
Well, actually what happened was that when after I'd graduated from Harvard Law School, where I founded the Harvard Civil Rights Law Review with Mark Green out of New York, I had been at the Cahill firm on Wall Street, where, as you mentioned, I was one of the counsel on the Pentagon Papers case for the New York Times, where we secured the right under the First Amendment to publish all 47 volumes of the Pentagon Papers, and I was one of the lead counsel on the case that established the right of journalists to protect their confidential news sources. After I had done that at the Cahill firm, I was recruited to come to the office of F. Lee Bailey. Bailey's office had been retained to represent James McCord in the Watergate burglary. And James McCord, as you may recall, was the former CIA wiretapping specialist who actually blew the whistle on Richard Nixon and the Plumbers Unit, and wrote the letter to Judge Sirica revealing the existence of this covert operation that was going on out of the White House. And during that stay at Bailey's law firm, I was asked to by a classmate of mine from Harvard Law School, was an old friend of mine who had become chief counsel for the American Civil Liberties Union in their Rocky Mountain states back in May of 1973. Remember, the Watergate burglary was in June of 1972, and so I'd been there for almost a whole year. But I was contacted by my friend and talked about the fact that the American Indian movement had seized the small town of Wounded Knee on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and the Nixon administration had brought in military troops and surrounded them in this little town of Wounded Knee, and had brought in sharpshooters and tanks and armored personnel carriers, etc., and that he, as legal counsel for the American Civil Liberties Union for the whole region, wanted me to come in to help him figure out how to defend the members of the American Indian movement. And so I came in and was there for some 2 weeks working on that case, helping to put together the motions that eventually generated the dismissal of all of the charges against the leadership of the American Indian movement based on prosecutorial misconduct on the part of the FBI and the Justice Department, et cetera, for lying and fabricating evidence against them, et cetera. And I came back to the office at Lee Bailey's office in Boston, and Lee gave me a call on the phone. He said, Danny, he said, look, I understand that you were out at Wounded Knee this past 2 weeks when you took your vacation. And I said, yes. He said, come on to my office. Let's talk. So I went into the office, and he said, which side were you on? And I said, well, actually, I was filing amicus briefs as a friend of the court, challenging the legality of some of the conduct on the part of the federal government in this case. And he said, you weren't supporting the FBI and the Justice Department? And I said, only to the extent to which they were conducting themselves legally, and they weren't in many cases. He said, what the hell good does that do us? He said, if you'd at least been on the side of the FBI and the Justice Department, we could have earned a bit of goodwill, so you could have gone and helped negotiate a better sentence, for example, for one of our clients, like the Angiulo brothers, who are the mafia in North Boston. And I started to have a long conversation with Lee about, I had come to his office to try to get him to participate in public justice cases, to apply some of his considerable skills as the number one criminal defense attorney in the country at that time, to help people in need, that were being oppressed by government activity that was illegal and unconstitutional. And he said, look, I represent people, for pay, and I do a very good job of it. He said, and that it's not my job to determine whether they're good guys or bad guys, or whether they have committed a crime or they haven't. That's up to the jury. I just give them the best possible defense that money can buy. And I was trying to explain to him that there was another reason for being a lawyer, another reason for believing in law and understanding the deep nature of the source of law.
Let me jump in. Hold on, Danny. How old were you? You're standing in F. Lee Bailey's office, the most powerful attorney in the United States, maybe even in the known universe at that point. And you're attempting to school F. Lee Bailey at what age?
I was 28 at that time. I think in 1973.
Oh man!
And so I had just come out of the Cahill firm where I went in when I was 25 years old, where I'd represented the New York Times and represented the NBC News to establish the right of journalists to protect our confidential news sources. I'd already helped found the Harvard Civil Rights Law Review. I wasn't awed by him. I was trying to get him to apply his skills and talents in support of what I understood the law to really be all about.
That's right. So and see, the perception, Danny, I'm going to jump in because you ran over a point there that we need to circle back and address. Mm-hmm. And that is, if there is something that enrages public opinion about who and what an attorney is, attorneys will always say, hey, it's just my job. He may be guilty or not, or he may be a bad guy or not, or she, but that's not my concern. I am paid to put up the best defense. Those kinds of statements really enrage people.
Yeah, well, not only that, but it's not even true. I mean, the fact I just had this conversation 2 weeks ago. I got invited out to Las Vegas, and people came out that were talking about wanting to put up $1 million grant to do a major motion picture about a case I did. Where I did the case that was attempting to get Charles V. Harrelson a new trial for having been convicted of assassinating federal judge John Wood down in Texas. And
you're talking about Woody Harrelson's dad.
Woody's dad, Woody's dad.
Right.
And I went down in, and I had won the motion to get him a new trial. They knew about this, and they wanted to do a major documentary film about this because they had begun to suspect that he was in fact innocent, which of course he was. And so they wanted me to participate in a major documentary film about that. And it turns out that one of the major funders that was funding this, his daughter had just finished her first year in law school, and she had gone to work for a Las Vegas-based criminal defense firm, and she was starting to become disillusioned. and she was thinking of quitting law school. And so I said, no, don't have her do that. Have her come and talk to me. So she came in the next morning, and all of the potential funders that were part of this consortium that was going to put up this $1 million all wanted to sit in on this conversation. And so I began to talk to this new second-year law student and explain to her what the law was really all about, and to try to really understand what the mission was of dealing with the law as an interpreter of the law, as an applier of the law. And so I had an opportunity, as I said, just 2 weeks ago to go through this story. But when I tried to have this conversation with Lee Bailey back in 1973, I realized that we were, the old proverbial two ships passing in the night, or passing in a fog bank, not being able to see each other. We were just completely communicating on different levels, just like you see now going on in the impeachment. You got just two completely different visions of the world. Fox Television News and MSNBC sort of railing away at their respective positions, and no seeming relationship between the two. And so that what I did is I had this conversation with Bailey, and I wasn't able to convince him about this. And I was staying at his townhouse on Beacon Hill at the time. He was married and lived outside of town, outside of Boston, with his new wife, his third wife, Linda. And so I was staying in his townhouse, and I went to church that Sunday morning at St. Cecilia's, and I was on the way back home, and I stopped into this bookshop, which I tend to do on Sundays. After church, I would kind of wander around in a bookstore, see what's new, and I ran into John Rawls' book. His new book was out called A Theory of Justice. John Rawls was the chairman of the Department of Philosophy at Harvard University. So I began to read through this Theory of Justice, and this was going to be his master work before he retired, and he was going to explicate what he understood to be the basic understanding in Western culture of the theory of justice. And he says at the beginning of the book that he thought that what he was going to end up discovering, that when you were in a majoritarian democracy like the United States, he had assumed that the mode of ethical reasoning that was going to be applied to try to resolve how you were going to select from among a range of possible solutions to a given public policy problem, that the society would tend to select that which generated the greatest good for the greatest number. A classic majoritarian utilitarian mode of ethical reasoning, John Stuart Mill, the utilitarianism.
Right.
And he said, but much to his surprise, it wasn't true. That he said, if this were true, as he put it then, he said, why isn't it true that the 90% of the people of the United States who are white don't still own the 10% of them that are black? He says, what has this happened? Why is it that isn't what gets done? And he said it was because of the existence of this other school of thought that he referred to as the intuitionists. And that the intuitionists would say things like, all men are created equal and they're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, and they have the right to freedom of speech and freedom of religion, and and going down the list, right? Freedom of the press. And so I said to him, well, that's really fast. I said to myself, this is really fascinating. That must be what's going on here. I'm one of these kind of intuitionists. But so I bought the book and I read through it, and I couldn't quite understand what it was that was motivating these intuitionists. He wasn't clear about what that was. So that following Monday morning, I called up his office over at Harvard. I'd already graduated from Harvard College. I studied with Henry Kissinger and had done my economics there with Kenneth Galbraith, and had studied sociology under Henry Reisman. All of these classic figures. And I still wasn't able to answer these questions. I didn't feel that I didn't have the vocabulary, I didn't have the concept system to be able to explain this. So I called him up I called up his office, and I said, look, I said, my name's Danny Sheehan. I went to the college, I went to the law school. I was in Larry Tribe's first constitutional law class he ever taught. I did the Pentagon Papers. I did the right of journalism. I started waving my school tie through the phone, hoping that she would let me have a meeting with Professor Rawls. And so she said, well, let me talk to Professor Rawls. He's awfully busy. And I said, look, just call me back. See if I could get just 15 minutes with him sometime this week. So she called me back about a half an hour later, and she said, okay, you can come in Wednesday. You can come in Wednesday afternoon at 1 o'clock, and you have like 15 minutes. So I went over Wednesday afternoon. I sat down with him and started explaining to him who I was and what the cases were that I had done and what this conflict was that I was having with F. Lee Bailey. And he was sitting there, kind of his jaw starting to drop, saying that he'd never had an experience where someone who was so deeply and intimately involved in these major confrontations in the legal system really expressed that kind of an abstract interest in justice and what the theories of it were. So he invited me to come back to Harvard University to study and get a PhD, to do a PhD thesis, basically helping him write a sequel to his book, actually, on really a comparative analysis between majoritarian utilitarianism as a mode of ethical reasoning versus intuitionism, because he too couldn't explain to me when I asked him.
Were you in the middle of your own paradigm shift? I mean, were you close?
No.
Were you close to?
I was. No, I never changed my thing. I just wasn't able to articulate it. I wasn't able to articulate what it was, for example, that caused me when I was in northern New York growing up in high school, when I would walk out into the night, a winter night, and I'd look up and see a million endless stars in the Milky Way, and I would just be completely awed. And I would pick out a star and focus on it and see it throbbing there in the night, saying, wow, there are planets going around that star. There's other beings walking around on that planet. They're looking out into their night sky and seeing our sun. Isn't this astonishing that the way our human family conducts ourselves here on the planet, where we draw lines in the sand, and if you step over my side, I'm going to shoot hot lead into your body, or I'm going to use all my creative skills to figure out weapons to kill you. And I said, this is absurd. It's so completely contradictory to reality itself. But I still didn't have any way of explaining that. And so when I found myself at sort of a loss of words to be able to effectively persuade F. Lee Bailey, so I went to have this talk with John Rawls. So he ends up inviting me to come back to Harvard to do the study. So I tell Bailey that I'm leaving. And so I leave there in the fall, in September, late September of 1973, and I re-enrolled at Harvard University. And I thought I was going to be in the Department of Philosophy, writing a PhD thesis under John Rawls. But he ended up having me enroll at the Harvard Divinity School, where Professor Ralph Potter was there. And Ralph Potter taught the course at the graduate level on comparative social ethics, comparing and contrasting different systematic ethical worldviews. And so this was the first time that I'd ever discovered, I said I'd had Henry Kissinger, I'd had all these big people, James Schlesinger for history. Nobody had ever explained this to us at all.
Did you sit around? I'm just envisioning. I just have to ask, did you sit around with your friends and contemplate these very deep philosophical foundational questions? How do you do that?
I played football. I played football and baseball in college. I was a linebacker. I was a linebacker in college football. And I just knew that you weren't coming onto my side of the line here.
Right.
And so I was deeply invested. I was the captain of my football team in high school when I was a freshman. I was the president of the student council, the vice president of the class. I was all these things. I just kept doing everything that you were supposed to do as an American. And the famous story when I was number one in the state of New York for the Air Force Academy appointment, because I wanted to become an astronaut and go out into outer space. And when I went to have the interview with Senator Jacob Javits in New York, I was number one in the state. So he has to interview the top 5 people. And when he asked me why I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy, I told him that I wanted to become an astronaut. And he said, and he did one of these things, oh yeah, right, every guy, in 1963, right? Everybody, all the young American boys want to be an astronaut. And he said, so why do you want to be an astronaut? I said, so I get a chance to go out into outer space so we can actually reach out and establish contact with these other beings from other star systems. So he just sort of stared at me.
You said that to Jacob Javits?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
man.
So he said to me, he said, what? He said, you really believe that there's other life on other planets and stuff? And I said, well, I said, sure. I said, so do you. You're a United States Senator. You're not stupid. You know that there's life out there. There has to be life out there. And he was stunned that I said it to him. And I was only 18 years old at that time. And then I said, so you're a United States Senator. You have to realize that that's true. And he was so taken aback that he admitted to me that he had given the appointment to the United States Air Force Academy as a senatorial appointment to the son of one of his principal funders. But he offered to send me to the Naval Academy to go to Annapolis. And I said, I'm not into boats, I'm into airplanes, and I want to go into space. He said, no, you can go to the Naval Academy and still fly. I said, yeah, but I'm not into the boats, I'm into the airplanes. And so he said, all right, you can go get your appointment from the congressional representative, he'll certainly give it to you. He says, you're number one in all the categories. And so it turns out that the congressman gave his appointment to the son of the Republican mayor of Glens Falls, in his congressional district. And I said to myself, whoa, wait a second here. I said, this isn't working correctly at all. This is not the way we were promised our government works. There's something out of tune here.
Right.
And so I decided that I was going to have to become a lawyer. I hadn't even thought about it up to that point. I was going to be an astronaut, right? Get out into outer space and get to meet the extraterrestrial people and stuff. So I said, I'll have to become a lawyer. But once I became a lawyer, I got a full scholarship to Harvard College and then a full scholarship to Harvard Law School. When I came out, when I saw the Pentagon Papers, I was one of the first ones to see all 47 volumes of the top secret classified Pentagon Papers, this deep secret internal study done by the Rand Corporation of how we got into and how we conducted the Vietnam War. And I saw all this stuff about the massive heroin smuggling that our CIA was involved in, the massive political assassination program. They had the Phoenix program. And I said, wow. I said, wait a second. Things aren't just a little bit out of tune.
Right.
Our government is playing an entirely different song than we'd ever been told about. And so somebody's got to do something about this. And I figured I'd take some time and fix that, right? Get journalists the right to protect their confidential news sources, expose the Pentagon Papers, get all that to happen. And then I get to go back and get to become an astronaut.
Well, you know what you didn't do?
I got detoured.
You know what you didn't do? You should have got F. Lee Bailey to smoke a joint. What I mean by that is, and
I know what you mean. I know what you mean by that. I know what you mean by that. But the problem is that Lee, unfortunately, was into whiskey and bourbon and hard liquor, which was very bad for him overall. And it wasn't something you could kind of talk him out of. And it was Batty Andy was into it, who was his chief investigator, and the other guys that were in the law firm were into drinking hard liquor, and flying around in Learjets and quaffing waitresses and stewardesses and stuff like that. I wasn't into that stuff. And so it wasn't the world I wanted to be involved in. So when I got back to Harvard to do the PhD work, I discovered in studying with Dr. Ralph Potter one of the most astonishing discoveries that I'd ever made. And what he says, he says, look, he was a direct protege of Talcott Parsons. Professor Talcott Parsons was the founder of the Department of Sociology at Harvard Law School, preceded Reisman and all those guys. And what he discovered by having thousands of his students over a period of some 45 years interview tons of people all around the world, and found out that he discovered that when our human family is confronted by a given public policy problem, whether to use nuclear weapons in first strike, or whether to have, capital punishment, or whether to support abortion, or, whether to support birth control, or, to support gay marriage, any of the major social controversies, when a culture is confronted by one of these major social problems, that what happens is our human community tends to divide itself up into factions. In that he wrote a major thesis talking about this thing where he created the right-left sociological bar graph. It's where we get right-wingers and left-wingers from. That's where the concept comes from. It comes from Talcott Parsons. And he said, that he thought that our human family would naturally divide ourselves up into basically 5 different distinct factions, which all he referred them to as right systematists, left systematists, right marginalists, and left marginalists, and what he called middle marginalists. And so this is what Ralph Potter was teaching. And what he would do is he would have you as your master's thesis, antecedent to your PhD thesis. In your master's thesis, you would select one public policy problem and then you would do an analysis to find out where the various thinkers in the human family came out on this issue. And you would categorize them into one of these 5 positions. And what I discovered in doing the work, I came to conclude that in fact, they were leaving out 2 essential worldviews, the actual conservative worldview and the liberal worldview. That his spectrum of worldviews didn't include those. And so what I did is I did my master's thesis, writing it, modifying Talcott Parsons' sociological bar graph to insert into it the liberal and conservative worldview. And what I discovered was that, look, now all of a sudden I've got 7 integral worldviews. And it became very obvious to me that the qualities and characteristics of the people who were adherents to these different worldviews tended to correlate to the chakras in the human body.
Ooh.
The charisms that are characteristically identified as being generated by a dominant chakra in a given person.
Right.
And I said, holy mackerel, look what we've got here.
Right.
We've got something going on which is extraordinary. And then, catch this, I realized that, in fact, the great adepts assert that there's not only the root chakra and the second chakra, third chakra, fourth chakra, and then the crown chakra, the 7th chakra, but if you raise your arm above your head and clench your fist, there's an 8th chakra that actually resides outside of our human body at the apex of the intersection of all of these energy fields that are generated each by each one of these chakras. And that therefore there's an 8th paradigm worldview. And lo and behold, it became obvious to me that we as human beings we perceive things in octaves. That just like with, like sound, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do.
Right.
Just like the visual spectrum, of red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and indigo and violet. Our human species as a physiological instrument actually has evolved a perception system that is able to perceive things along in octaves, but the senses, the physical senses that are acknowledged for us to actually possess, of touch, taste, sight, smell, etc. That there's only 5 of them so far. But there's this raging debate going on about the potential rising in our human family of a 6th faculty, what they call ESP, that has these faculties of potential telepathy, precognition, a whole series of these qualities that they have these transpersonal type of experiences. And so I said, wait a second, we're on the brink of evolving into full manifestation a new 6th sensory faculty.
Okay, let me jump in. Let me jump in right there. I need to take a break right here, Daniel. So let's do that. We'll pick up where we're leaving off, 8 octaves in ESP. This is Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Our guest tonight, Daniel P. Sheehan. We're going to do it all. We're discussing the new paradigm. This is Fade to Black on the Game Changer Network and KGRA, The Planet. More of Daniel after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Our guest tonight, Daniel P. Sheehan. We'll be over in the UK, June 26th and 27th, 2020. We'll be at the Awakening Conference in Manchester, United Kingdom. Go to awakeningufo.com for tickets and info. And Daniel, now what I would like to hear is your definition of what the new paradigm is and what this shift is. And did this start with your visit to Wounded Knee?
No. The fact is, I knew what happened is that when I was at the divinity school, I had gone for the one whole year to the divinity school when we had filed these motions earlier in May of 1973 when I was still in Bailey's office. But I then left in the fall and gone to divinity school, as it turned out. But after my first year there, it turns out that they decided they were going to bring the trial on against these people. And so my friend, who was the head of the ACLU out in the Rocky Mountain region, asked me to take a leave of absence from Harvard Divinity School and come back there and help in filing these motions for the trial, to stop the trial from going forward. So I did. I went and met with the dean at the Divinity School and met with the people at Harvard University, and they agreed to give me a leave of absence from the master's and PhD work. I had gotten the major part of the master's done, and so I went out and I became the chief trial counsel for 10 states of the United States for the American Civil Liberties Union, and was going to be in charge of representing the ACLU during the trial. We filed all these motions, and it turns out that after a few months, we ended up succeeding. And the Judge Nichols, dismissed all of the charges against them. And so I went back to divinity school. So I spent a bunch of time out there in Pine Ridge, knowing all the leaders of the American Indian movement. I sat with some of their major medicine men. I listened to what their worldview was, and the American Indian movement was made up primarily of young Native American men and women who had gone off to college. And they were having this clash of worldviews from their kind of Aboriginal, traditional Lakota view of the world, and then encountering this radical, scientific, logical, positivist, materialist worldview that was being espoused by the American Academy, of all the universities. And so they were rebelling against that, and they had come back to the reservations to try to assert the sovereignty of their own territory. So I had, in fact, been exposed to a lot of this information. I ended up doing a major sweat for the first time in my life with the 5 medicine men of the 6 medicine men of the 6 Indian nations up in the Mohawk territories, up in Akwesasne, up in northern New York, because I was legal counsel. I became legal counsel for the Native American Rights Committee for ACLU National, along with Joe Durem, my friend, out of the Rocky Mountain region. And so I became quite intimately familiar with their worldview, what their traditional worldview was, and got to spend time. I actually got invited to go to the sun dances where white people aren't allowed to go, and was allowed to do sweats with the medicine men, not just these kind of, lightweight kind of sweats that they do with white people sometimes. But the bottom line is I went back to the divinity school, and I ended up getting recruited by the United States Jesuit Order. The United States Jesuit Order was forming a new national headquarters in Washington, D.C., where they were going to have representatives from all 10 of the provinces in North America, and they wanted to have a general counsel assigned to their social ministry office to be able to advocate public policy positions on behalf of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit Order, the largest single order in the entire Catholic Church, which in turn, of course, is the largest single denomination in all of Western civilization. So I found myself there at the headquarters with access to over 10,000 Jesuits who were in 43 different countries around the world, and I was, along with Father William J. Davis, in charge of formulating public policy. And so I was revisiting this same question about, given a range of choices to select among in trying to address a given social problem, how is it you go about determining which one is you're going to be selecting? And so I revisited the issues that I was studying back at the divinity school. It had been introduced by Ralph Potter, and so I went back and had a number of deeper conversations with Ralph Potter, trying to really understand what it was that was causing these individual people to be adherents to one or another of these structural worldviews that resided along this octave of worldviews. And it turns out that when I pressed him on this, sort of as a lawyer, cornering him in his office and not letting him kind of escape and still-shalling into these vague answers, right. And I finally got him to acknowledge that what causes the difference between what worldview a person will adhere to is dependent upon how he or she answers one of 4 major fundamental pillar beliefs that every human being sort of has to come to grips with. And one of them is that how did the universe come into being?
Right.
What is your either conscious or unconscious belief about how the universe came into being? Do you believe it's always been here? Was it created out of nothing? You know, is it just going to be expanding out into nothing and dissolving and going into nothingness? What do you think is going on here? So it's your cosmological worldview. And it turns out that then he also said that the second of these four pillar questions you have to answer is what they call the teleological worldview. And that's just a big fancy name for how do you think the universe is unfolding? However it is you think it came into being, is it unfolding, moving towards some major cataclysmic event or some epiphany of some sort, some parousia point where the whole universe is moving towards some sort of ultimate fruition of some sort? What do you believe about all that so that you can link into that to try to ascertain some sense of meaning in the whole universe? Or is this just chaos? And then the third of the four major pillar beliefs is the bigger, fancy word called an ontological belief, and that is what do you believe as to how consciousness came into existence? Assuming that there's this whole universe made up of all these elements on the periodic table, that blend together and form different elements and mixtures and all of this. How does consciousness actually come into existence? Is it just an epiphenomenal reaction to the interface between mass and energy, is some sort of accidental kind of penumbra around these chemical events, or is it something else?
Right.
And what do you think about that? Then the fourth and final one of these is what they call the epistemological epistemological belief. That's just another big word for what means do we as human beings have at our disposal by means of which we can possibly answer questions like that.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. That's exactly. Danny, I have to jump in. Did you listen to my opening statement tonight? Just tell me no.
Yes.
You did?
Yes, I think I did. Yeah, I think you tuned me in time to hear about it. Yeah.
Okay.
But maybe I didn't. Maybe I didn't. But tell me it again. So
but this is the universe right here connecting us, because I had no idea that you were going to give us these four fundamental questions that everybody has to face.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
But those four fundamental questions, I didn't know about this, but this is what I spoke about tonight in my opening statement. And I think that all of us need to understand these basic fundamentals, these basic things, because if it goes down here on Earth, and I'm talking about chemistry, atoms, particles, elements, and the way that they combine the same way everywhere throughout the universe, number one. Number two, how do these basic things, and I'm talking about a particle or an atom, eventually combine into hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon, magically dance and combine together, create amino acids, and then RNA and DNA, our basic genetic makeup, and allow us to think, laugh, and tell jokes. Right? Where that's it. And that's exactly what you stated right here.
That's the ontological question, is the source of consciousness. The epistemological question is, as I said, what are the means that we have at our disposal by means of which we can possibly answer cosmic questions like that? Are we confined to just what we can see or touch or taste or smell or weigh? You know, if you can't weigh it or measure it, does it not exist? Is there some other realm that we don't have immediate sensory access to yet? Of course, this raises a fundamental question about the existence of a potential sixth faculty, human faculty, biological faculty, that's evolving over time, teleologically, unfolding progressively, and so that there's another faculty, a sensory faculty that our human species is evolving that we experience as ESP. And the challenge, of course, is that we don't yet have a fully developed vocabulary to be able to really explain that, because historically it's been sort of a minority of people among all of our people that experience this. And 98% of all the regular people spend their life getting and spending and laying waste to their powers, and getting a job and working and trying to survive with their kids, and they don't think about these things, and they don't encounter those kind of experiences. But they're hearing about it, and they're reading more about it, and they're becoming more and more fascinated about it. And the field of scientific evidence that's unfolding in this area is becoming more and more convincing. But remember that people are being directed, having their attention directed to this faculty by the experiments in science. So there is still material science, radically material science, scientific logical positivism that is kind of searching around trying to find the answer to this question. And there's a fundamental question as to whether those are the sufficient tools, whether our five senses mediated through our intellect, through rational materialism, really give us access to those, or does it require an experience? Is it like, how are you going to explain seeing to a whole culture that never has experienced sight? Actually, H.G. Wells has got a famous little short story about that, about a little girl that lived high in the Andes Mountains that was evolving sight, and everybody thought she was a witch, and they ended up killing her because they were so freaked out by her ability to tell what's going on the other side of a room, but the bottom line is that this issue of whether or not, and I believe that the evidence is going to be quite overwhelming, that our human family is teleologically evolving more and more this sixth faculty of extrasensory perception, as they refer to it. But when you look at the sociological bar graph fully fleshed out with Talcott Parsons, and you insert the liberal and the conservative worldview into that, and then come to realize that there's really eight of these different worldviews, there's only 7 of these worldviews that we've actually fully explicated. And you look at the political, it's important to remember that every single one of these worldviews that lie along these nodal points from right to left on the sociological bar graph, every single one of them has categorically different answers for each of these 4 basic questions. But what makes it a worldview is that the answer that the person provides to each of these 4 different pillar questions, the 3 of them are all internally and self-referentially consistent with the 4th. And so that there's a common principle that is functioning in your answer to all 4 of these questions, so that you have an internally consistent worldview. And that's what causes you to have a really fully evolved worldview. And what happens is, along this, just like in a scale of notes, there are pure notes of the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. But you can fall in between these notes, and it's all off tune. It's off tune. That's all confused. It's dissonant. It doesn't have an internal and self-referential resonance. And that's why in music it sounds bad when you listen to it. But if they hit the notes right on the button, then you can understand them. And so that's the same thing with regard to a worldview. So that each one of the worldviews, the right systematist, the left systematist, the right middle marginalist, the left middle marginalist, the middle marginalists, and then these 2, the left and right middle marginalist positions of the liberals and conservatives, all of these have their own distinct worldview, and each and every one of them answers each of these 4 pillar questions in a completely categorically different way. Is there
a group, a measurable group, that answers those 4 pillar questions with, I don't care? Right?
No, not that I don't care, that I don't know. And that's the middle marginalist. The middle marginalist, which is the rational, scientific, logical, positivist worldview, is saying, look, we can't tell anything for sure until we can measure it, and we can see it, and we can taste it, and we can feel it. What they do is they set up this filter for reality. The only things that they include in their reality are those things that are subject to experience directly through our 5 senses, whether it's increased by a telescope or a microscope, but it's still the same thing. And so what they do is they're agnostic on all of these other questions. they sort of acknowledge in theory that there's a whole dimensions of reality that may exist outside of what we can say is true, but they will not confirm that.
Those are the ones
I don't know.
Those are the ones that I want to speak to. Those are the ones, Daniel, right?
Yep.
Those are the ones that need to listen to this show. Those are the ones that need to hear you. Our audience gets it. Right? They already get it. We've already got them, right? We've already got them.
Yeah.
We need those middle marginalists out there. Even, dare I say, I wasn't going to go here, but the atheists of the world. And not to say that I am, a full-on religious guy. I am not. I'm not. But the atheists of the world that believe that there's nothing else to anything. Right. There's nothing else.
Actually, you're conflating two different categories. One is an atheist. The other ones are agnostic.
That's right.
An agnostic is a person. Here, let me say what happens is I've laid that out. But what is important to understand is that each and every one of these worldviews, once you answer each of these four pillar questions in a way that each of the answers are internally and self-referentially consistent with each of the other three, what happens is when you discern the principle that has governed your answer to each of those four things, that is a common principle, what that does is it generates a particular principle. And what happens when you apply that principle to it's what is called a mode of ethical reasoning. Everybody wants to choose, given a range of choices in a given public policy problem, they want to choose that one which is consistent with reality. With reality, that's the standard. But they each have a different view of reality because of their different answers to these four pillar questions. And so what they do is they develop a particular mode of ethical reasoning, a particular identifiable mode of ethical reasoning, which is how they determine what conduct they're going to engage in that makes it consistent with their view of reality. And now, very importantly, if you take that mode of ethical reasoning and you turn and you apply it to all of the normal workaday questions that you have to answer in your own life. Who are you going to marry? Whether you're going to go to war or not? You're going to go to the draft? You're going to resist the draft? All of those questions, if you apply the mode of ethical reasoning that is inherently generated by the self-referentially consistent set of answers that you provide to these four pillar views, if you apply that mode of ethical reasoning to choosing what to do in the face of each of these workaday reality questions, that is what generates a philosophy. You see, that's where philosophy comes from. The reason that it's so appealing, a particular philosophy, is because it's completely consistent. And you can always get an answer to your question pursuant to that philosophy. And so the people that have been disciplined and have answered those four pillar questions in a way that is self-referentially consistent with each other, and they've identified a particular mode of ethical reasoning, and they've systematically applied it to all of the normal questions that you face in your life, they end up writing about this, and they become known as philosophers. And so there are these different philosophies. And when you apply that philosophy to the question of politics, of how is it that a community is supposed to make a decision to choose one or another of the options that they have with which to respond to a given public policy problem, that becomes your political philosophy. So that you can answer the question of, well, what are the names of these worldviews, these 8 worldviews along the spectrum? You can answer it by cutting into it anywhere. What's the cosmology? It's teleology, it's ontology, it's epistemology, it's mode of ethical reasoning, it's philosophy. The one that people talk about more than any other one is this political philosophy. That's the one you always hear about, so that you understand that along the sociological bar graph, you have on the extreme right, you have authoritarians. And immediately and those are your right systematists. Your right marginalists, just one step in toward the middle, your right marginalists are reactionaries. They're not the same thing as authoritarians. It's a reactionary. And then one step closer into the middle is a conservative. And then one step more into the middle is your moderate. And then one step more to the left is your liberal. And one more step to the left is your progressive. And one more step to the left is your utopianists. And so these are the 7 classic political worldviews that are in constant dialogue and conflict. But what you'll notice is we don't have one for the 8th yet. We do not have a human worldview that has elucidated an 8th paradigm worldview. And that's the worldview that we're moving toward. That's the one that we're going to have to come to grips with when we encounter, for certain, an extraterrestrial civilization. So that we now, for the first time in our human history, realize that we are not, in fact, the only highly intelligent and highly technologically developed species in the universe. There are more highly intelligent, highly technologically developed, but categorically non-human sentient species elsewhere in the universe. And every single one of the philosophies that we have developed so far, whether it's Hegel or Nietzsche or Spinoza or anybody you want to talk about along the political spectrum, all of them share in common the fundamental assumption that our human species is the only intelligent, sentient species in the universe. And that's the big challenge that we've got right now. Here's where we stand in history at the very edge of coming to realize now on a planetary basis that there exist other highly intelligent and highly technologically developed but non-human species in our galaxy. And we have to be ready to develop a thoroughgoing human worldview that adjusts to that reality.
Let me ask you this. I've got 30 seconds, Danny, only 30 seconds. That 8th segment, that 8th category, where would it rest? I would think it would have to be in dead center.
No. It exists to flesh out the full octave. Now remember, if you take a single spot and you take lasers that are the pure color of each of the colors in the spectrum, the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. If you take a laser that is that pure light energy and you point all of them into a single point on a plate, they set up a mutual interference pattern that generates white light.
So it would be everything? It would be all colors.
That's right.
It would be all colors. Okay.
That's right. They're all there.
And
if you take away any one of them,
right,
then it doesn't happen. You don't get white light. So we have developed over all of our history so far these 7 thoroughgoing worldviews, but we haven't, in fact, allowed them all to come together in some kind of common vision that enables us to transcend our mistaken belief that we're at the apex of all biological evolution in the universe. We have to come to grips with this.
Danny, hold on. We ran right into the commercial break. Let's do this again. Okay. We'll be right back. This is Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Our guest tonight, Daniel P. Sheehan. When we come back, we're going to discuss, what just popped in my head? Gandalf of all colors. That's right. It's Fade to Black on the Game Changer Network. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. If you miss a live show ever, just get our podcast. Go over to jimmychurchradio.com, click on that podcast banner. It's just $2 per month. We have over 1,000 shows archived right there for just $2. It's simple. Click on that podcast banner. Danny, before the break, talking about this 8th segment, and that one being of something that is all-encompassing, right? The white light. It has all colors.
That's right.
Would that reside? Would that reside above the 7 and understand and embrace the 7 underneath?
Yes. It's just like the 8th chakra, that you cannot get the Kundalini energy in the human body up into the 8th chakra that resides above the head until you open all of the chakras and you get them all functioning in balance. That is the dynamic that lifts the Kundalini energy up through the human body up into making that jump from the top of your head up into that chakra that abides at the apex of all the energy fields, that envelope of the 7 different energy vibrational fields that encompass the human body. That's how you do it. And so this is the great mystery that abides in the human family, and it's where, and the reality is that as you actually open up each one of these new ascending chakras in the human body, you actually begin to develop additional faculties. The one that is the most widely known right now is the 6th faculty, the radical monist 6th paradigm worldview, which has to do with ESP and precognition and remote viewing and all of that is so popular now. And it's a lot of the Hindu stuff and the other things are well known. What they call the siddhas that are attached to the opening of that particular chakra. But we still got the other chakras. We've got the 7th chakra, which is the crown chakra, and then there's this super mysterious 8th chakra that only very few of the adepts will really talk about with their students, because they say, look, don't get too carried away about trying to figure out this 8th chakra until you get all the others opened and functioning in balance, because they have to be in balance in order to have the Kundalini energy flow up smoothly up through your body into the 8th chakra. Now, this is all talking about it in the microcosmic level of the human body, but the fact of the matter is, it is the microcosm of what the macrocosm is in the universe. That's what we are. And the reality is, if in fact you have an extraterrestrial civilization that may exist, 100 light years away, and that they have a red dwarf star, so that their planet that exists in the Goldilocks zone around the red dwarf can live for 50 billion more years than our star system. So it's possible that a sentient civilization could have evolved on this planet that has 10, 20, 30 million more years of evolution than our human family has. And so the question is whether or not they have gone through these stages of evolution. And a lot of the data that we have now from various witnesses around about their direct encounters with extraterrestrial beings, that all of these different kind of interesting charisms that they have to be able to walk through walls, to be able to float and have telepathic communication with us, et cetera. There's a whole series of charisms that they display that cause everybody to be kind of freaked out when they first encounter them. And so you get into this entire issue, which is, as you know, one of the most important issues of all time, is this kind of figure out the kind of I guess which you could call the protocols, I guess, of how we encounter these extraterrestrial beings and this potential extraterrestrial civilization. We know perfectly well that there's a great reluctance on their part to reveal themselves to us while we're still functioning down at a 2nd paradigm, dialectical, confrontational, good guy, bad guy conflict role in devoting a lot of our talents into developing larger and larger weapon systems to try to destroy each other. That's why we see their intervention so regularly, at nuclear weapons bases like the Nike missile sites and the Minuteman sites, nuclear power plants and stuff, and tracking around nuclear submarines. There's a whole series of things that they appear to be concerned about us. But one of them is that they do not feel disposed toward making themselves known to us, at least in general, on an open basis, while we're still functioning at this extremely low level of our total potential, our potential development. And so that's in the churches, as we know, the formalized religions, for the most part, are not doing terribly well at helping to train up our human family into really coming to grips with this, to coming to understand the metaphysical and kind of holotropic dimensions of our own being. Now, very, very tiny minorities, and each one of the major world religions has come to grips with some of these things. The Hindus and the Buddhists and the even Christian mystics and the Kabbalah with the Jewish community, the Zoroastrians. There's a very tiny percentage, 1% of our human family, like in any given generation, that has really explored these type of subtle metaphysical realms. But these secrets that have been historically hidden from the masses for 5,000, 10,000 years, are now starting to become available. But the fact of the matter is, you could stand on a street corner trying to hand out, Sri Aurobindo's writings, on a corner, and there aren't 1% of the people that even bother reading them, because we're so densely entwined in our materialistic consciousness. And so the failure on the part of the organized religions to, they get trapped in their kind of bureaucratic lethargy in institutional responsibilities. And the role of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit order, as you probably know, in 1547, was to attempt to reform the worldwide universal Christian church, and to cope with the kind of corruption and the kind of malfeasance that is renowned inside the Catholic Church. And virtually every one of the major religions has this problem. And so that when I ended up getting recruited out of Harvard Divinity School, rolling over from my master's program into my PhD program, and got brought down to the headquarters, I ended up getting to devote a fairly substantial amount of my time into trying to explore this in direct context of trying to figure out how we would make choices on the public policy level of what we would advocate. And this was right in the midst of leading up to Vatican II, to trying to get the Catholic Church to open its doors, to reform, to get past this thing of mandatory celibacy, that is causing so much terrible problems with the kind of the sexual repression and perversion that people have encountered, but the same thing is true of the other religious communities, that they all have these terribly challenging difficulties. And what we have to try to do as a human family is to reach out. I think one of the most important calls that we've encountered is the call that was issued by the Catholic Church, actually, back in November of 2009. Actually, now it's like, 11 years ago, in November, after the Vatican, even under Benedict the 16th, this kind of reactionary guy, that they brought a whole bunch of world scientists to Castel Gandolfo, where the Papal Observatory is, and they listened to them, explaining to them how, in light of the Hubble and the Planck telescope and the other telescopes that we now have orbiting, that we're now being able to confirm for absolute certainty that there are indeed other planets, Eureka, other planets, and that they're now virtually certain now they've come to grips with the reality of the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence, and that Father Jose Gabriel Funes, who was at that time in 2009, was the director of the Pontifical Observatory at Castel Gandolfo. He's surrounded by all these scientists and all kinds of the cardinals in the church, standing in the well of the press office at the Vatican, stated that in light of the discovery of more and more of these exoplanets in other star systems, has now become clear that much sooner than had previously been anticipated, we are going to discover life elsewhere in the universe. And so therefore, the time has arrived for the beginning of a very serious conversation about the profound philosophical and theological questions that are posed to our human family by the discovery of life elsewhere in the universe. Now, because of my position as chief counsel at the Jesuit headquarters in the social ministry office, I reached right out to Father Jose Gabriel Funes, went to see him, and within 3 minutes he acknowledged to me he's not talking about the discovery of bacteria under some ice-covered ocean, on a planet, 10 light years away.
Right.
He's talking about the discovery of another highly intelligent and highly technologically developed, but categorically non-human species right here in our own galaxy. in that this is a profound question that's confronting the church. It's a profound question that is confronting our entire human family. It confronts all of our institutions, not only our economic institutions, but our political institutions, our military institutions. So you see a response, for example, on the part of our military institutions, like the To the Stars Academy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, where they come up, men who've devoted their entire lives to the defense industry have come up out of the shadows now and are stepping forward saying, look, it's time that we come to grips with the reality of UFOs. But as you know, they're pulling their punches. They're drawing back and saying, well, we can't tell where they come from. You know, we know they're not Russian. We know that they're not ours. We know they're not Chinese. We know that they're functioning beyond any of the capacities that are known in physics to us, but we don't know where they come from. You know, and what they're doing is they're intentionally ignoring, cutting themselves off from all of the information about reports of actual extraterrestrial beings interacting with.
Oh, man, we just lost Daniel. Just like that. You like that? Wasn't that interesting? Okay, let me raise him again right here. That was interesting. Just like that, just a click right at the key moment. I don't even react anymore, folks. I don't even react. But let's see here. Wow. Okay. Not connecting. Did somebody just jump in and cut this off? Okay, Daniel, you there?
Okay. Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
It's way up on the reservation. I'm sorry that it gets a little difficult up here sometimes. But
no, that was the NSA stepping in, brah. Okay.
So I'm not faulting them categorically.
Right.
I'm just saying that that's their own choice because they spent their entire lives. They spent their entire lives in the military establishment, and they perceive the entire manifestation of the UFOs and the potential existence of extraterrestrial life in terms of a threat to our national security.
Right.
That is the security of the national security state. And that's totally to be understood. But Dr. John Mack at Harvard University, he wanted to found an institute, the Worldview Institute, to study all of the human worldviews to try to move toward opening up a discussion about this eighth paradigm worldview that would require, of course, fleshing out the particulars of all of the other seven worldviews, and then trying to understand how this compares and contrasts with them, you know, over and above the fact that it's the only worldview that does not attach itself to the existence of our human family as the only sentient life form in the universe.
Well, I mean, where's the threat, though?
Study.
Yeah, but where's the threat? Where's the threat? There is no
I don't
threat.
believe it is. No, I don't believe there is. Obviously, but the problem is, and I don't mean to demean them, but you know, the fact is, there's an old Sufi saying that when a pickpocket meets a saint, all he sees are his pockets, and that, you know, when a person spends their entire political career, their entire professional career inside the military, and that they are trained instinctively to think of anything that doesn't respond to the dominant control of the leaders of our nation state as a potential threat, as a potential adversary, you know, that's how they experience it. You know, like you remember Lou Elizondo, you know, when he was the famous thing that Lou keeps saying, well, you know, if you get ready to go to bed at night and you lock all of your doors and lock all of your windows, and you wake up the next morning and you find muddy boot prints across your living room rug, you know that something's going on, even if you don't know what it is. That's his kind of presentation of the UFO phenomenon. You know, but he experiences it as an odious type of threat of someone invading your sacred private space. And that's how they experience it. So we need to. It's not that they're not part of the dialogue. They are. They are good representatives of the second paradigm, dialectical, you know, yin yang, antagonistic, good guy, bad guy worldview. And they're very articulate and very intelligent.
This is what's really funny about that statement from Elizondo. If there is a threat from somebody that can arrive here on an interstellar spaceship. Yep. You ain't got no defense. The only defense is start digging holes. That's your defense.
Well, no.
What are you going to shoot?
Reach out and actually open an intelligent conversation with them.
Yes, spitballs aren't going to work. Not dig holes
and start fighting them.
Yeah,
but that isn't part of their training and their experience. And so that one can't fault them as such over that. But they have to really understand. Well, they may have a place at the table. They don't own the table.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. You don't even deserve a place at the table as long as you come as long as you come at it with that view, right? That everything is a threat.
But that's exactly the problem. The problem is that the adherence to every single one of the worldviews, all along the political spectrum from right to left, all turn and look at the worldview to their left and the worldview to their right, and they hold them in contempt. And they demean them, and they think they don't have a place at the table. You need to remember, if you withdraw any one of these lasers of pure light of their particular vibrational frequency from the interface on the one single spot, you never generate white light. There's certain dimensions of insight that each of the worldviews has, just like each of the chakras. To say that's why you get these fundamentals. Anything below the waist, the root chakra and the genital chakra, the power chakra, they view these as anathema, that they're absolutely abhorrent, and therefore they don't integrate them into their life. And they think that they have to exist all in their heart or all up in the sixth chakra, of their brow chakra. And they basically try to cut off the energy of all the rest of their human body. It's not a healthy thing to do. And in the same sense, you don't want to exclude people who are dialecticians. The real tough guys are the authoritarians. The ones that are one step to the right of the reactionaries. The first paradigm worldview guys, authoritarians, are really hard to cope with because they are absolutely experientially convinced that the universe is chaos and that the only possible response is to impose a completely artificial order through an authoritarian regime, which they're part of. And so that they're very difficult because they are much more so than almost any other one of the worldviews, completely intolerant of every one of the other worldviews. And so it's hard to have them at the table. But what I'm trying to do, at least part of what I've tried to do in the Jesuit order and tried to do in the talks with the Catholic Church and the bishops and Father, Jose Gabriel Funes and the others that are talking about this, I'm trying to get people to understand that you have to be able to embrace and listen to what the pieces are that each of the worldviews are being proposing, because it's absolutely essential to remember, Jimmy. We all have to remember this, is that nobody at this point in time has a definitively correct answer to any one of these four pillar worldviews.
That's correct.
So to get self-righteous about our own either conscious or unconscious belief system about the answer to those questions is, hubris. And it could be potentially the end of our human species. We have to be able to overcome that kind of hostility toward adherence to other worldviews to try to harvest the positive aspects of reality perceived by each one of the worldviews and get us all into harmony. But it's an interference pattern, at least pursuant to the analogy of the laser lights. It sets up a dissonance and interference pattern. It's like an overtone. Like, if you whistle really loudly right next to someone and they're whistling in a different key than you are, there's this resonant overtone that gets generated, and that the overtone couldn't be generated by either one of them. It has to be both together. And so there's this overtone that has to get generated and respected by the manifestation of each of the worldviews, but we have to do this in a way that doesn't demonize and try to destroy each of the other adherents to the other worldviews.
That's right. And you know what's so interesting about that? Because in its basic form, what you are suggesting here is actually quite simple. We make it complex, but the answers are very, very simple. And if you take the view of our planet, you're way out. You're on the moon, and you look back at planet Earth. And you think about what's going on there, the micro side of it, not the macro, the micro. where we are actually fighting each other over religions and borders and money and resources and killing each other is the craziest, stupidest thing ever. It's just like, what intelligent species in this universe would look at us and go, well, they're worthy of talking to. They got it together.
That's the challenge.
That's it.
The challenge that we have. And so the test, and there are various exercises and points of view inside various religious traditions and spiritual communities that try to deal with this by saying that, look, you look at your own child in the eyes when they're first born, and you see this helpless, loving infant that is completely dependent upon you, and that you have this rush of extraordinary love for this little being. You have to try to develop that same degree of love for every other, not only human being, but you have to have that same kind of love for other sentient beings, for dogs and cats and bears and deer and, people from other races and people who don't like you, people who are mean to you, other species in other galaxies. The development of that kind of ability to have that kind of affection really requires the opening up of all of our chakras and opening up that eighth chakra so that you can have that kind of illumination, that you are this constant overflowing source of the flow of Kundalini energy out into the world that just exudes love and affection for others. And you can discover that actually has an effect upon other people. It sets up a field of energy around you that basically draws other people into it. Now, I don't by any means profess to be anywhere near that. When I'm doing the deposition of the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, that is gunned down on the streets of Greensboro, North Carolina, back in 1979, who gunned down, 6 of the people who were just trying to organize a union at the textile mill because they were organizing black and white people together on an equal basis. And I'm sitting across from him, and he's sitting there with a lapel pin with 6 skulls on the lapel pin that represent the people that they shot down and killed that I represent. That my temptation to leap across the table and strangle the guy, is especially for a college football linebacker in my earlier incarnation, is very challenging. And you have to try to go through those experiences and overcome those experiences. On a scale of 1 to 100, I'm lucky if I'm in the double figures of evolution on this right now. But at least I understand what the issue is, I think.
Well, that's half of it. I
put an awful lot of time thinking about this.
Yeah, that's half of it. Let's take our break right here. We need to get this in. Daniel P. Sheehan is the guest. The new paradigm shift is the subject. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. We'll carry on with Daniel right after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Our guest tonight, Daniel P. Sheehan. And you can become an official Fadernaut by simply going to our membership section over at jimmychurchradio.com. Become a game changer today over at our membership section. It's very simple. Just go click, join. You can also gift a Fadernaut membership. All right. Daniel, this is my take. I want your response. I can tell you how to get F. Lee Bailey and everybody else on the 8th segment bandwagon, the all-encompassing light, the entire planet in one move. This is how it would happen. E.T. arrives. E.T. arrives. Big starship right over the United States. We all see it. They come down and they go, "What's up?" And then they get back on the ship and split. That's it. They leave and leave us alone. That's when the wake-up would happen. Right there. We don't have to talk. There's no dialogue. All we know is there's somebody out there much more advanced than us, and they're not interested. We've got to get our stuff together. And that's it. That would be the paradigm shift.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. That one of the challenges is that each of the adherents, a full, pure kind of adherent to each of the respective worldviews, they actually experience the phenomenon in a different way. That the people who are in the military, would view a massive ship of that kind coming into their airspace. They would immediately immobilize. They would mobilize all of their military forces against it. They would come to see that they're kind of militarily helpless with regard to it. They would feel preeminently challenged, and what they would do is they would resort to dramatically increasing the amount of research they're doing on the pieces of the various crafts that they've recovered down through the last 75 years to try to develop a weapon system that they think they could take on that group with, because that's how they think about it, and that the other group of people that are like in the seventh paradigm people, they would say, oh, this must be the angels. These must be the angelic beings that we've heard about so much. We ought to praise them. We ought to worship them. They are so much more superior to us. And then it must be the explanation for the Greek Olympiad gods and stuff. That what we need to do is we need to be able to, we've got enough information right now within our human family to realize that the time has come. When you have official spokespeople for the largest single religious denomination in the entire Western civilization issuing a formal public call announcing that that we're on the brink of discovery. They don't say that we may discover it. They're taking the position that we are going to discover it, and that the time has come to start reflecting on these fundamental philosophical and theological questions.
That's right.
That these are our institutions trying to, given all their limitations, trying to reach out to get this thing to start to happen. That's what we really need to do. That we cannot constantly be depending upon some interventionary force. That we have to demonstrate the worthiness that we actually have evolved to be worthy to participate in an extraterrestrial civilization. That you can't. You remember, there's an old story that I've always been very impressed by. There was a little boy who loved butterflies, and he wanted to collect all the different kinds of butterflies to keep them in his little aviary that he had where they all fly around in there. And what he did is he was looking around for a perfect monarch butterfly specimen, and he finally found this little cocoon of a monarch butterfly, and he brought it home, and he put it in this little box with cotton all around it and had a light on it to help it evolve. And he watched it, and a time came when the butterfly started to break out of the cocoon, and it was struggling, and its wings started to come out, and it was struggling against these silken threads, and it got to the point where it had one silken thread left to go, and it was struggling, trying to break this last thread, and the little boy couldn't stand it any longer, and he got a little tiny piece of shears, and he cut that last little golden thread, and the butterfly came free, and it was the most perfect specimen of a monarch butterfly, except that it could never fly, because it was in the struggle against that last strand of silken thread that they would actually be able to develop the internal muscle structure that was essential to it being able to fly on its own. You see, and this is the thing with our human family. We have to be able to evolve these qualities of spirit and metaphysical perception and humility and a sense of a holistic belonging to our universe and the love of our planet, and the caring for our planet, and not be trapped in, for example, thinking that we have to dig into the earth and pull out of it its oil and its gas so that we can generate cars that'll go, from 0 to 60 in 1.8 seconds. And it can race across the planet, on these asphalt highways that smother all the living beings in the soil. We've got to be able to overcome this ourselves. We need to do it from a point of view of affection, not a point of view of fear. It was Ronald Reagan himself has said it. It's standing on the floor of the United Nations. I oftentimes think that think that the only thing that can really bring us all together is to just have an extraterrestrial spaceship come and land on the front yard of the United Nations. And that would definitely bring us all together. All it would do is bring us all together to try to figure out how to militarily confront it. At the present time, we have to accelerate our elevation of our consciousness. And we have this challenge right in front of us right now with having to shift over to alternative sources of energy, of the solar and the wind power that are all naturally available to us. We have to be able to do it in such a way that the batteries that we develop to store the solar power don't generate as much trouble and as much pollution as if we kept on using the coal and the gasoline and everything. We have to be able to do this together, and that we have to be motivated by caring and affection. The fact of the matter is now, the people who own the stock in the major oil corporations and the people who work for them, they know that the global climate change is occurring. And they spend all of their time trying to rationalize it. Oh, it's another natural ice age, or there's solar flares coming off the sun. And it is flying directly in the face of overwhelming scientific evidence. The reality is, they realize that the people that are suffering the most immediate consequences of global climate change are all black people and brown people, for the most part, and that their desert homes out in Africa are being destroyed by, 130-degree temperatures now. The seas are rising everywhere around the world. We've got to understand, we've got 403 private nuclear reactors, all within 150 of them are all within a mile of the seacoasts around the world. And and people don't understand the scientific information. That the reality is that the Antarctic ice field is melting right now at a dramatically more rapid rate than we'd ever expected it was going to. And that if in fact not only the glaciers melt, but the ice fields melt in Antarctica as they're doing right now, we are looking at a 240-foot rise in the mean global sea level, in the next 20 years. And people don't even begin to fathom what that means. The kind of destruction that's going to wreak on the major cities of New York City and Miami and New Orleans and Los Angeles and San Francisco, and other great cities around the world. And the military defense establishment knows what's going on. They've got all of these plans going on of how to try to cope with massive migration of literally billions of people. By the year 2030, they're anticipating that 63% of our entire human population will live within 10 miles of the seacoasts around the world. And these are the exact areas that are going to be inundated. So we have to come together. There's a great fear that's sweeping the world about what the potential consequences are. And the fear is so deep and profound that people are in total states of denial, that they're actually trying to pretend it isn't true, because they can't come to grips with the fact that we've all participated in this. We've all driven, gasoline cars. We've all had gasoline in, heating our homes. We all fly on airplanes. What we've got to do is we've got to come to grips with this, but we have to come to grips with it out of affection. We have to care about the black people and the brown people and the people in other parts of the world that are going to have these consequences imposed upon them first. We aren't going to be able to shelter ourselves in gated communities here in the heart of North America, and somehow survive this. This is a threat to our species, but it's a self-imposed threat to a great extent. And to the extent to which there's other factors going on, natural phenomena going on the planet, we're capable of adjusting to that. We can figure out what to do about that, with geoengineering and dealing with some of those other things. But we can't use it as an excuse for pretending that we're not causing the proximate portion of this global climate change. So we're faced with an extraordinary state of emergency here on our planet, right at the exact time that we're reaching out to the stars. We're getting set to put up the next generation of space telescopes, this next year, that is going to be able to filter out the glare of the stars so that we can actually physically see the planets. As you know, right now, we know that the planets are going around these other suns simply because it's causing a dimming of the light. When we focus the Hubble on it and just focus on one star, we can see it dimming, and we know it's a planet passing between us and the star. But, with this next generation of space-borne telescopes, we're going to be able to actually see the planets come around these stars nearby and we're going to be able to focus on them and actually take isotopic, readings, or what do they call it, the oscilloscope readings of the atmosphere on those planets, and be able to discern indicia of life, on these other planets. We're right on the very brink of this happening, and the worldwide Catholic Church recognizes that it is facing a situation that is dramatically more disruptive than simply Copernicus and Galileo coming to realize that we're not in the physical center of the universe.
Right.
They've had to struggle through that one, but this is going to be disenthroning the human species from the pyramid, the apex of the pyramid of all sentient life in the universe. We have an entire set of mythologies that we've crafted for ourselves, that somehow the physical universe has been created as the stage on which our single species in the entire universe is playing out the drama of the unfolding of human consciousness up from the primordial slime of our particular planet up into a being that can perceive ourselves as travelers to the stars, and that we think that's the major soul drama going on in the universe. We've got to figure out another vision of what our role is in the universe, what our relationship is to the other beings in the universe, what role space travel has, how are we going to be able to apply the technology that we've developed to save our planet from the ravages of our own excesses. These are things that has to be done not out of fear and not out of a threat, but out of a love and affection for our other people and for other living things on the planet, the other living species on the planet, our whole planet as a living organism. We are in fact generated by our own planet. We have been generated up out of the materials of this earth, as living extensions of this planet. And we have somehow alienated ourselves from even acknowledging our own organic relationship to our own planet. This is, and we've got to be able to overcome this. We've got to be able to embrace that relationship and extend our affection that we generate for our own loved ones, our own babies. We have to generate that same type of affection for our planet and for the other living beings on our planet, the deer and the bears and the birds. We have to realize, like the Native American people do here on this reservation where I'm standing right now, that these other beings are their relatives. They experience these other beings as their biological relatives, and that they relate to them in that way. And they have, I've sat in the sweats with the medicine men, and they believe that the Wachuchi civilization, the white people civilization, is going to collapse all around them. And so what I do is I'm working with them to try to figure out how to most effectively establish their own sovereign authority over their own Aboriginal lands. The Great Sioux Nation, takes up the entire territory of the Dakotas and over into Montana and Wyoming and part of Nebraska. That this is a huge territory that the people of the Seven Council Fires, have lived in for 10,000 years. So that they need to know how to survive here. But I'm trying to work with the people here to help them share their vision and their relationship with the world to other people. And that's why Chase Iron Eyes, why I defended him in opposing the Dakota Access Pipeline, why I'm here organizing against the Keystone XL tar sands pipeline. It's why Chase Iron Eyes' young daughter, Takata, is going out doing speeches now with Greta Thunberg. That's why we brought Greta Thunberg here to Pine Ridge, a couple months ago, and then she went up to Standing Rock. She's working with us. We're trying to mobilize young people through the Sunrise Movement to reach out to the rest of the people of the world, because as Greta says, so long as you are still thinking only in terms of what it is that is immediately politically feasible, rather than what is essential to be done to save our human family, their generation has no hope. They have no hope. And we can't allow our children to despair about their future. And we have to fill them with hope. We have to do that from a spiritual perspective, not a tacky spiritual perspective of fundamentalists or, Bible pounders or any of that stuff, or Catholics or even Jews. We've got to find a human collective response on our planet to the subtle energy fields that are generic to our planet and with which we're bathed in the universe, and that we have to be able to experience those vibrational frequencies, take them in, develop the energy fields around our body by getting each of the chakras in our human body healthy and vibrating at its appropriate rate, so that the envelope of energy that it generates around our body can have sympathetic resonance with the bonding phenomenon that bonds every single irreducible integer of matter in the entire physical universe into direct, immediate harmonic relationship with every other one. This is the answer. This is the genuine spiritual experience, the holotropic experience that one can have. That we know the secret ways of meditation, health, like you talk about on your show. How you have your body healthy, how you clean your colon, how you do meditation, how you take care of yourself. And you have a practice, and it doesn't require you to run off to your local Catholic church or Protestant church or your temple. You need to find your way there to understand that there is a great secret that lies just on the other side of a numinous experience for all of us that can reveal to you the genuine reality of the integrated wholeness of the entire universe and our direct, immediate biological relationship with every other sentient being in the universe. And that's what's going to reach out and establish a genuinely new paradigm. It's not going to be just an updated sixth paradigm of radical monism. Platonists was doing that. The Neoplatonists have talked about that. Sri Aurobindo talks about that. The Hindus talk about that. That's the sixth paradigm worldview that the whole baby boomer generation has gotten terribly excited about discovering. But it's hardly the be all and end all. Nor is the seventh paradigm theistic worldview, the emanationist worldview. That there's something more profound, and it lies out toward the extreme end of the spectrum of our human experiences right now. But we've been able to grasp its reality conceptually now. We see what the concept is, so that we know what the map of the territory is. And so we have to start to devote ourselves through the proper diet, our proper meditative techniques, our proper abstinence, of not, pounding food into your body to, stimulate your five senses to the point where you kind of grog out all the time, satiating yourself with alcohol and inebriants. I'm certainly no prude. I mean, nobody's going to accuse me of that, but the reality is that there is a way of attending to your body as a means of getting access to this experience of all of your potential human faculties. And we can accelerate this process within one lifetime. That we can each do this if we turn our attention to this. It doesn't mean that you have to forego regular life. It doesn't mean that you can't have a regular profession. It doesn't mean that you can't have a regular family. What it means is that you have to make this process sort of central to your life, because we're faced with a set of emergency situations, not just the global climate change, not just the threat of potential thermonuclear war, which still hovers over us until we get rid of these nuclear weapons systems, and not only the potential threat of 150 Fukushimas, of the rising sea level inundating these nuclear plants and contaminating our ocean and killing all the life in the oceans, but the fact of the matter is we're now on the very brink of being confronted with a potential collapse of the fundamentals of all of our existent human worldviews that are all rooted in the primacy of our human species as the pinnacle of all biological life in the universe. We have got to get busy talking about, working together on how to develop a worldview that takes into account this genuine reality that has been historically perceived as a spiritual dimension. But we have to develop an entirely new religion of a holistic religion that places our human family in proper context on our planet with all the living things, and in a proper context in relationship to other sentient species in our galaxy to begin with, and in the universe. And we have billions and billions of years of future ahead of us if we do not destroy our own planet and destroy our own species. Remember, Jimmy, all species are not necessarily destined to survive.
Let me jump in and say, and we've only got a few minutes left, are there any world leaders right now? Are there any heads of state? Are there any real religious leaders that have stepped up and suggested any of this, or are we just miles away?
Well, I think what it is we have to be very careful about having to rely upon one or two or three major religious leaders to sort of lead us all on up. The new paradigm really embraces the understanding that this has to come from the grassroots up. This has to come from individual people coming to realization in their life. That we had the phenomenon of LSD. I never would have done it in my whole life. I was in law school and doing all this, linear rational stuff. I had one of my friends actually ended up putting LSD in a cup of herbal tea that I had one time, and I was just kind of, amazed at what had happened, but I didn't even know it. I wasn't even asked. But, all of a sudden it just dawned on me that there was this other experiential dimension in life. And so once I encountered it that single time, I realized what it is that they were talking about, that the spiritual leaders were talking about. There are people who know these secrets, but they aren't necessarily, on the evening news, and they're not necessarily the heads of the religious institutions. There are people who live in monasteries of various sorts. They're in spiritual communities, in different the Zoroastrian communities, the Sikhs, and the Jains, and the Buddhists and the Hindus, the Zoroastrians, all kinds of the religious traditions have individuals who are very knowledgeable about this science of the chakras in the body and the energy fields in our body and the relationship of these energy fields to other living things in the world. So there are, and I'm saying that these writings that these people have done historically only for other high adepts in young monks that are learning this stuff are now available to us. That people can find these books, can start to read through. I would just recommend that for everybody who's listening, and it sounds a little didactic here, but I think you should go get a copy of Stanislav Grof's book. Stanislav Grof is the guy who developed holotropic breathing, which is a way of generating kind of these transcendent states of consciousness where you can experience this without LSD, without any other kind of external stimulant. It's a whole breathing technique. It's like a Hindu breathing. And the book is called The Cosmic Game, Exploring the Frontiers of Human Consciousness. It's an excellent read if one wants to sort of approach it from kind of a scientific materialist point of view, because he's a regular licensed professional psychologist and psychiatrist, and he writes about these different human states of consciousness. And it's a good primer to begin just saying, holy mackerel, I didn't know any of this stuff. This is really quite phenomenal. These historical secrets have been hidden deep into the traditions of these esoteric communities are now becoming available for us. So I think this is a pathway for us to respond to the call that's been issued to start to explore among ourselves, the laity, the regular people of the world, with each other horizontally, with our friends and our people in our community. And as you said, sitting around with your friends and put your feet up and have these conversations. I think we need to start to explore these profound philosophical and theological questions about our place in the universe and our place on this planet that is a healthy, integrated place that can help save the future of our planetary systems so that we can continue to evolve on this planet as we move out into the stars. I mean, that's my opinion. So, and I'm not suggesting Stanislav Grof is the great person you're talking about, but he cites other well-known spiritual beings, but he's approaching it from a psychological human level. And so it's Stanislav Grof's book. It's called The Cosmic Game, Explorations of the Frontiers of Human Consciousness. I would just recommend it to everybody.
Well, without a Merkel or a Putin or a Trump or Boris Johnson, without somebody like that, a head of state, to step up, somebody's got to be first. And you can be as grassroots as you want, That's what this show was all about, Daniel. You know this.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is.
But
I do know that.
But without somebody like that with a powerful voice from above to push things over, we're not going to get anywhere. We need somebody with courage to speak about this out in the open.
People will rise. People will rise, Jimmy. You know, you have the great benefit of having access to your audience, of finding different people, you know, that are just at fairly low levels like I am, that have been exploring these questions, to bring them on the show and have them talk to your listeners, and to give them particular potential reading assignments and thoughts that they can reflect on.
Right.
You know, that this kind of stimulation of this kind of a rising energy among the people ourselves is exactly what I think the ETs are looking for. You know, the people who rise to the position of being the head of a state, you know, the states, the nation states are simply a function of the Treaty of Westphalia, you know, of like 1538 or whenever it was, which was a set of agreements among royalist families to divide the planet into little boxes and then establish your authoritarian dominion inside that and develop the resources for yourself and your family. You know, so a person who aspires to be the head of a state isn't necessarily the kind of person that you think has the right kind of consciousness, you know, but there are a number of people that you'll find that are even referenced in this particular book by Stan Groff, that he'll show you some other people that you can read some of their stuff. They've actually sat down and done some reading. I'm trying to think of a few of them right now. Say it's a JKL. Let's see here. Lao Tzu has done a lot of writing about this, and so there are different writers, but some of it's a little too esoteric for people that they don't grok it right away. But I think that you could start doing some reading, and people will rise up, not necessarily as heads of state, not necessarily as heads of major institutional religious orders, but up out of the grassroots of people. And that given all the access to the media now with podcasts and shows like yours, we have an ability to reach out across the planet to all of our sisters and brothers and lift up the consciousness of everybody together collectively. And that's where the tide is going to rise from us, all of us, I think.
Thank you so much. We're going to see you in just 2 short weeks right here in Los Angeles at the Conscious Life Expo. And what are you going to be speaking about this trip?
I'm going to be speaking about the new paradigm and its relationship to the Green New Deal, which our office is drafting now, the California State Green New Deal. We have a 50-page outline of the statute. We have 250 pages of it drafted already. We're working on toward probably 400 to 450 pages, dealing with all 13 of the major sectors that have to be addressed. That has to do with the fossil fuel industry, the major corporations and their impact upon economic development, water resources, transportation, electrical energy. There's 13 whole different sectors that we're addressing, but in a short time we'll get a permission to release this 50-page outline. It's a lot more than the 9-page House bill that was introduced by OAC and Ed Markey, and it's a lot more thorough than Bernie's. I'm not short-skirting them, but this is one that can get passed in California because we have a supermajority in both the Assembly and in the state Senate, and a governor that'll sign it into law. We have to be able to demonstrate that this can be done in California to act as a template and leadership for the whole country. So that I'm going to be talking about the Green New Deal statute and this whole new paradigm movement in the world, about how we can all work together to bring dramatic change to our planet and to help save our species from ourselves.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and keep rolling that rock uphill, my friend. And it's comforting for me to know that when I get in trouble, I've got your phone number, and that's all I need. Daniel, safe travels out here to California. We will break bread once again.
Thank you, Jimmy. Keep the phone number close.
I'll talk to you. Daniel P. Sheehan. And Daniel's links are right there at jimmychurchradio.com, the romeroinstitute.org, and everything that you need to reference all of Daniel's work is right there over at jimmychurchradio.com. I'm going to take a quick break right here. Thank you, Daniel. Safe travels. This is Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. You can follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. You can also follow Daniel on Twitter, Daniel P_Sheehan, right there on Twitter. This is Fade to Black on the Game Changer Network. I'll be right back, and I'll open up the phone lines. Stay with us.